Hello and a very warm welcome to all for today's ISNTD Connect session, a very special session indeed on many levels. If you haven't been to one of our Connects before, my name is Marianne Comparet and I'm speaking from the International Society for Neglected Tropical Diseases. And as part of events, we do run a book panel twice a year. And so it's with immense pleasure, in fact, complete honor that I'm welcoming both of our speakers here today. And we will be discussing some quite hard-hitting issues really at the core of neglected diseases, but more generally, neglected issues in science communication, and more generally in health. So without any further delay, I'm sure you will all join me in welcoming very warmly our two authors, editors, speakers today. On my top right, it's my pleasure to welcome Daisy Hernández. Hello, Daisy.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. Daisy, you are author. You're also associate professor in the Department of English at Northwestern University. And we also have joining us today Dr. Elizabeth Rasekoala. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Elizabeth. You've edited a very important volume that we're about to discover and discuss in a few minutes. You're also the president of African Gong, the Pan-African Network for the Popularization of Science and Technology and Science Communication. So thank you so much for being here today. And the two books that we will be discussing, I will put up a picture in a few moments. And the two books that we're discussing today really are in many ways different, but in many ways very, very similar. And those are kind of the things that we'll really look forward to unpacking in the next hour or so, talking about the really difficult, vast, complex issues, untangling a bit of all that through a lens of gender, race, but also sociocultural inclusion, and what this means for science, for the neglected parts of science, marginalized voices, and neglected tropical diseases. So with all that background in mind, it's my pleasure to hand over to yourself, Daisy. I think you'd be the best person to introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background about what brought you to writing your book, and what was your training, what is your path in life that brought you to being an author, and in particular, what led you to writing this amazing book, The Kissing Bug, a true story of a family, an insect, and a nation's neglect of a deadly disease.
Yes, I actually do not have a background in science or medicine. What I had was a background as a journalist, usually writing about racial politics here in the United States. But I did have a family member who was diagnosed with Chagas disease. Do you need me to talk about what Chagas disease is, or?
You know, we have quite a broad audience, so
okay, right.
Two lines.
So I had an auntie in the United States who was diagnosed with Chagas disease, and I only ask because I don't know how many experts are in the room, and this will be basic or something. But so actually, when she was diagnosed, we knew very little about it. We knew, I think, that it was a vector-borne disease, but like even that, we actually didn't know very much about. So Chagas disease is endemic to South America and Central America and Mexico. It is a parasitic disease caused by Trypanosoma cruzi. And this parasite can be very dormant in the body, actually, for up to 30 years in some cases. So you can have situations where people are infected as children, but aren't symptomatic until they're very much adults. Which is what happened in the case of my auntie, I think, but also which gives the perception sometimes, as I was interviewing people in the community here in the United States, Latino immigrants mostly, they think of it as like an old person's disease because that's when they see symptoms in a person. So like I interviewed someone whose child was born infected. She herself did not know that she was infected. It can be passed from mother to child. And so just the idea of congenital Chagas was very shocking for her, as it was for me, because we thought of it as something that only happens to adults. But the parasite, in about 1 in 3 people, the parasite will generally attack the heart, also the GI system, and can cause sort of all kinds of havoc to the electrical system of the heart. A small percentage of people will lose their lives to this disease, so it can be quite deadly. And then we have many people who live with the parasite just fine and live a normal course of life. And right now, doctors cannot tell us which patient will go in which direction. So I grew up, I think I was like 5 or 6 years old when my auntie was diagnosed. I grew up in a very typical immigrant family in the United States. So everyone in my family spoke Spanish. I was the bilingual child. So I was talking about Chagas disease when I was 6 years old, but I didn't know what I was saying. And so I thought it was a very rare disease, and it was my auntie lived with it for many years, going in and out of hospitals. So I knew of it as a chronic and rare disease. And when she died from it, it was quite a shock because in a lot of ways, because we had such little actual scientific information, such little medical information about what she was dealing with. And at that point, I realized, my whole life has been to some degree shaped by this disease, because she was like a mother to me, not a far away auntie that I never saw. She was in my life every day. We had a difficult relationship, the way that mothers and daughters have difficult relationships. So I realized, this has shaped my life, and I don't know anything about it. And I figured that there was a book out there about it already. So I went searching for a book, and I didn't find one. And the beautiful novelist Toni Morrison had said, if there's a book that you don't see out there, and you want to read it, then it's your job to write that book, And so I took Toni Morrison's words to heart, and I sent myself to boot camp for science and medicine. I read everything that I could find, and then I started calling doctors and scientists, and people were incredibly generous with their time and their expertise. And I traveled across the United States because I wanted to meet family. We had never met another family who had Chagas disease. So I got a chance to meet different Latinx families across the United States, in Los Angeles, in the DC area, and I'm trying to think where else. Anyway, all over. And I also went to South America, back to my mother's home country, to talk to patients there. And really to kind of investigate that it's not a rare disease, but that it's neglected. And so like the book really looks at like, why do we pay attention to some diseases and not others? And I didn't feel satisfied with just the answer of poverty. I wanted to understand more. Mm-hmm. So the book is a lot of, is sort of looking at, it's very personal to my family and the families that I interviewed, but it's also kind of looking at what is our global health policy in terms of race and in terms of economics. Yeah. I'll stop there because I could talk
about I don't even know where to start, Daisy. We've only just heard from you for 3-4 few minutes, and there's already so much in there that is, that's it. That is the core of the matter. And I suppose the first thing we should say is we're really sorry for your loss. That relationship is is brought to life in your book. It's very apparent that you were very close, but so many things that you've said, and particularly kind of this difficulty to meet other people, other persons affected by Chagas disease, other families who have lost a close member in the same way, that does remain a gap, despite these diseases having really huge numbers of people affected. They're not rare, they are neglected. So I wonder if you said you didn't have a scientific background, and I wonder if that wasn't really an asset, because you focus a lot in your book on this advocacy, on the persons affected, on, you know, what this means in terms of broader conversations about why are communities still neglected. So it's a wonderful read. It's not an easy one always, but a wonderful journey. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I suppose, Elizabeth, I would like to ask you the same question. Could you take us through your journey, your background, and what brought you to this day where we have this wonderful, very hard-hitting, but also full of advice and full of next steps of a very promising volume?
Thank you so much for that, Marianne. And I would also like to start by saying to Daisy, sorry for your loss. And it really is a special relationship coming from an African mindset where, you know, we are all about the extended family. There's no such thing as my child or your child. We have a saying that they're all our children. So, you know, I'm everybody's auntie, and I had so many aunties. So I know what you mean. It's that same kind of context. And in a sense, Marianne, I mean, I just had goosebumps listening to Daisy because my trigger was pretty much the same. And somebody actually, in a sense, nudged me and said, is there a book that you would like to read in science communication that you have never read? And it just struck me that being a veteran, as I've now been told, having done 30 years in science communication as a chemical engineer, which is what pays the bills, but science communication then became a passion and an outreach to address a lot of the race and gender inequalities that I found firsthand as a Black woman in engineering, and then looking around communities in both the global north. I spent close to 3 decades in the UK and also in my African continent over the years. So you begin to realize the global interconnectedness of these issues. But what triggered my response following that question of what book would you like to read and haven't read was actually the deep, deep frustration of understanding that for practitioners in the global north, they had very little conception of the global interconnectedness of these inequalities in terms of how they impacted on their peers, in terms of global South science communication practitioners. Totally invisible to them. Meanwhile, their peers in the global South were very much aware of these inequalities on both levels. So you get this sense of a global North-South divide. And it's like no one is crossing from one side to the other. And being somebody who was very active on both fronts, in the North and the South, I realized that somebody would have to take this on and actually create that bridge. And that really was the motivation, one of the key motivations for the book, to bring together a multidisciplinary. That was the other thing, Daisy. We wanted to, again, break another divide, which is that of the scientists and the non-scientists. So we took on quite a number of sacred cows in this book in terms of making multidisciplinarity more than just a slogan. So we brought in a whole diversity of different disciplines, social scientists, natural scientists, physicists, mathematical scientists, you name it. And also that equal visibility for practitioners, academics, researchers from the global North and South, so that we create this cohesive synergy of what it actually means when we talk about global solidarity, global activism, and global advocacy. And in that process, you found that people in the North and South began to realize that, you know what? Sorry to use a political phrase, we're all in it together. We are all in it together. And people were surprised to find that they were finishing each other's sentences and kind of replicating each other's experiences across this divide. And the other motivation was to address this real profound invisibility of practitioners from the global South who had been working in the trenches for decades, writing, advocating, working in communities, and were just not visible. And yet they had so much to say, so much to contribute. And the third aspect was to shed light on critical aspects, as you have intimated, of global North divide inequalities that really get to the heart when we start talking about issues of neglected tropical diseases. And one of these was really for us to unpick this whole thing of helicopter science research, which we found inexorably leads to helicopter science communication, as Global South researchers are pressured through these inequitable international research partnerships to communicate science in ways that mimic and copy their global North counterparts. And we found that these so-called collaborative partnerships really come to the fore when we talk about neglected tropical diseases. And we were able to use that lens to unpack critical and interrogate equity questions, such as how fairly are the fruits of scientific research shared across the globe? Who benefits the most and who benefits the least? And we found that there were linkages and legacies of these perceived inequalities. They impacted on the consciousness of ordinary people in terms of trust in science and expertise. And they were directly linked to the marginalization of health sectors, such as neglected tropical diseases. So we were then able to pull together a kind of a circular interconnectedness across these different levels and to shed light on very, very challenging issues. And some people who are more cynical than me would say that it's not a coincidence that these interconnectedness have not been made transparent. There's a vested interest in keeping things hidden. And I can understand some of that. But what we're saying is that there is nowhere to hide now. We know where the dead bodies are buried, as we would say in my language. Yeah. And our job was really to dig them up and line them up and say, here they are. Yeah. So it was a very, very fascinating global engagement with 30 contributing authors from every continent of the globe. And again, across the age spectrum. So we had young, emerging, senior contributors. So we tried to address all the different kinds of gatekeeping to make sure that this book really told a cohesive story of global solidarity and activism and advocacy.
Wow, you've given us a lot to think about. I mean, 30 years building towards this moment. You shared some quite difficult insights, in fact, but I think it's really great to dwell on those. And as you say, it could be really a ramp and a route to have this field of neglected tropical diseases come out of neglect. And it's really important to take this moment and reflect on all of the things that you've said. And so thank you so much for summarizing it and for ordering all those really complicated issues in such a helpful way. And so I'm sorry, because we're online, so I can't actually show or hold a copy of the book. So I go back to my very boring PowerPoint.
There's a copy there.
Wonderful.
Yeah, there's one. Yeah.
And I'll just put up the covers once again so that we can see them very well. So just going back to the actual book itself, Elizabeth, Race and Sociocultural Inclusion in Science Communication. So just thinking of the volume itself, could you tell us a little bit more about its structure, its format? What can we expect to see in the book itself?
Well, the book is actually structured around 4 key thematic parts because we realized that we needed to kind of break it down in a way that people could actually make sense of. In a sense, the analogy we used was that of the peeling the layers of an onion. That was the visual analogy. Because if you think of the layers of an onion, each layer is connected to the one before and after it. And that was the real concept for the book. So we had 4 thematic parts. There was an introduction that kind of sets out, gives you a snapshot of what each chapter has to offer. And not only what it has, it distills the critical lessons from each chapter. We also had a brief for each chapter in the book that we had to spend at least a third of each chapter had to be about problem solving, coming up with specific practical solutions. It was very important for us that this book, each chapter should do 3 things. Problem analysis. How did we get here? And why do we see what we see? Second part. And the third part is, and how do we deal with this? What's the way forward? So each chapter was basically structured along those key critical elements to make sure that you follow that kind of arc of storytelling. So with the first thematic part, we looked at the practices across a number of indicators: race, gender, language, epistemic diversity, representation across different continents. Then the second part, we would then focus on science communication in the global south, but looking at specific pinch points: indigenous knowledge, cultural emancipation, and epistemic renaissance. How do we leverage those 3 critical pillars to transform science communication in the global south? And that also speaks to how do we leverage neglected tropical diseases? How do we lift that up? And the third thematic part was the decolonization agenda in science communication. And here we really were unapologetic and very upfront about what it entails. What does it entail? It entails deconstructing Eurocentric hegemony, ideology, and pseudo-historical memory. And people don't even start to think of how much pseudo-historical memory sits and asserts Eurocentric hegemony, and therefore we need to address in decolonization. And the final part was to look at the globally diverse history of science communication and how it really is more than just a recent Western construct. And here we went into the history of science communication or knowledge sharing practices as they were known centuries ago in other parts of the global south, to actually debunk this myth that places, non-Western regions of the world have not actually been doing science communication long before the West gave it the name. We may not have called it science communication. We might have called it something else, but we were doing it. And when you bring that recognition to the fore, you have a whole different kind of conversation as to ownership, access, belonging, and really foregrounding on issues of race, sociocultural inclusion, and global South priorities. So that was how we structured the book in terms of the layout and what each, and then there was a conclusion chapter where basically I pulled together all the key strands from all the chapters, key lessons learning, key signposting, and just sort of wrapped it up nicely, bringing the layers of the onion, so to speak, back together again. So the onion really was our visual analogy for structuring this book. I hope that answers the question, Marianne. Yes.
Absolutely. I will never look at an onion in the same way again, because
absolutely.
There is so much to learn from this book, and it's really admirable how you're also very much driven by next steps and what can someone who's been really stirred and moved by these issues that you raise, what can they literally practically implement going forward. So that's really excellent. And so Daisy, I'd love to turn to you, because your book is nonfiction, but at the same time you balance so wonderfully a very personal account and then just a kind of a scientific manual as well. We learn a lot in your book, and I was just wondering if, you could tell us a bit more about the structure, about what could we expect in the chapters and the pages of your book?
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. So beautiful to hear you talk about the book. I'm really excited to get a copy for myself. It actually took me a lot. It took me a long time to structure the book because I was, juggling so many pieces. I wanted to write about that relationship with my auntie. I wanted to write about all these families, these immigrant families in the United States that I had met. I also needed to explain the medicine and the science to a general audience. So I assumed that the people who would be reading the book didn't necessarily have a medical or science background. So I definitely felt like I was stepping into a role as a translator of science and medicine for this project. And it took me a while to finally settle on the structure, which I feel really good about because my editor and I worked for so long on this. But so the beginning of the book is about my relationship with my auntie and sort of the very intimate experience of this parasitic disease, this neglected disease. What does it look like in someone's day-to-day life? How does it affect the people who love them? And also, looking more deeply too at, if you grow up in a family that doesn't have many financial resources, doesn't have easy access to healthcare, I think I write in the book, it's like you live or you grow up with half fictions, half truths and half fictions about the disease itself. So I decided so like the first third of the book is all about that. And I decided to do that as a way to also bring in readers who would not necessarily pick up a book about neglected diseases. Like I figured the people who care about neglected diseases, they would read the book no matter what. But the people who didn't know about it, they would get interested in the relationship of the family, and what that family looks like. And also because I think that especially, I think a lot of people, everyone has experience with illness in their family. It might not be Chagas disease. It might be a different kind of illness, but it's just the reality of our lives is that we've had someone we love be sick. So I felt like it was a big enough door for a lot of people to walk through, I guess. And then I decided that the second part, the middle of the book, would really be introducing readers to what is Chagas disease in terms of the medicine and the science. And so that's the part of the book where you see me talking to a biologist in South America, who just devoted, I guess at this point, more than 30 years of his life to studying this particular insect, triotomine insect, studying the parasite. I spoke to another scientist here in the United States who also spent, 40 years of his life with the parasite. And that was actually a really, part of it, that was like the education piece of it in a lot of ways for the reader, but also a chance for the readers to see that, after viewing the disease through the family experience, like here's a scientist who he sees everything from the perspective of the parasite, you know, and like, oh, this parasite is very clever. And this parasite like can do all, you know, has survived for millions of years. And it's very different perspective for a general reader. You know, most of us who are not scientists, we don't think about the parasite's life, you know? And so I really wanted to also make those experts actual people on the page, you know, as opposed to just people who are holding knowledge, you know, make them also very personable. Like these people have just spent, you know, 30, 40 years, their entire lives dedicated to this. And they are characters in and of themselves. And, you know, they have their own relationship with this as well. And then the last part of the book is me going out and talking to other families and getting to hear about their experiences, meeting someone who got to the point where he did need a heart transplant because of this disease. And so it was sort of like, that was like for me, the gathering of stories and getting to hear, it ended up being a full circle because I ended up hearing a lot of what I experienced in my own family that's there at the start of the book. And then I also ended up, you know, I write in the book, because I went with a patient to the hospital, I ended up translating. So there I was again, like I was when I was 6 years old with my auntie, you know, ended up translating as an adult.
Yeah.
But, you know, it goes full circle. So yeah, that sort of ended up being the structure. And I think it's worked out really well. One of the big compliments that I received for the book was someone who doesn't have any interest in medicine or science. She read it because she knew my work. She's not a friend. It was just somebody who put this on social media, but she said, you know, I read this because I was really interested in like the family stuff. But then at the end, I realized I learned so much about something I never expected to, you know, really know much about. So that was a huge compliment that like the reader walked away with, you know, new knowledge and insights that they didn't actually expect or were planning on receiving in the process. Yeah.
Wow, that's just amazing. And it's true. It's such a wonderful journey when you can come out of what is almost a story, even though it is biographical in many ways. But you come out from there with so much knowledge and it's been brought to life. And that is, you know, a huge amount of work. And it's incredible that you've been so thorough getting absolutely everything right, and also really putting those other characters, as you say, on the page. A lot of them big things that happen in science really at the end of the day come down to the people who championed and carried that cause or that query or that gap in the knowledge, no matter what, as you say, sometimes for 30, 40 years. So thank you so much. And I was wondering if you perhaps both would agree to read a short passage from your book, and so we could really get a flavor for the tone and a lot of the things that we've been talking about. Daisy, we were just kind of really engrossed into the characters and the journey that you were telling us about. Perhaps if you don't mind to go first, we would love that.
Oh, sure. I think I'll read from the chapter about this patient that I mentioned who, he was actually the one that I went to the hospital with and was translating for. And he was also the person who ended up needing a heart transplant. Yeah, his name is Carlos. When I first saw Carlos in his Maryland apartment, he reminded me of my uncle. He had ironed his polo shirt like my Theo used to do, and he answered my questions with care, inflecting his words with a certain deference toward me as the journalist, la escritora, speaking overall in measured, soft tones. He was the epitome of politeness, of being educado, as Tia Dora would have said. She would have liked him. We sat by the window in the one-bedroom apartment Carlos shared with his 3 brothers. The living room had 3 twin beds arranged to form a wraparound sofa. The beds were communal. The brothers, who all worked in construction, slept wherever they happened to collapse on a given day, except for Carlos. He had the bed in the living room behind the television, the one next to the electrical outlet. Dr. Rachel Marcus had connected me with Carlos, and as I sat next to him by the window and turned on the recorder, I felt acutely aware that it was my first time meeting a person who had lost his heart to Chagas disease. The parasite has decimated his left ventricle, and so his heart could not get adequate blood to the rest of his body. He was in end-stage heart failure and needed a heart transplant. Of course, to me, Carlos did not look like a man who was dying. He had black hair and a generous smile. The only unusual feature was that he sat in his own living room with a black messenger bag, its strap across his chest. He called the bag La Máquina, the machine. It was his temporary heart. The Máquina's official name is a left ventricular assist device, or LVAD, and it made it possible for Carlos to be alive. Inside the bag were batteries and a black box that looked like an external hard drive, a kind of mini computer whose wire entered the wall of his abdomen and connected to a pump near Carlos's heart. The pump did what his heart could no longer do. It sent blood continuously from his left ventricle to his aorta to the rest of his body. To stay alive, Carlos had to have the LVAD connected to a power source at all times. Every 2.5 hours, he said he changed out the batteries. When he was not hooked up to batteries, he connected the Máquina to an outlet, which was why he had the bed next to the outlet. At night, he plugged in. When doctors first said he needed the machine, his brother, Elias, cried in the hospital room. "Don't worry," Carlos said to him. "How are you going to live with that machine?" his brother asked mournfully. Carlos had the same question, but said, "I'm going to live a long time," because he did not want to see his brother so upset, and because he did not want to die. The black machine in Carlos's hand made it possible for his heart to beat. And again, I thought of accordions, of the heart expanding and contracting, of a man forced to carry his heart in his hands. "Hace un ruido tremendo," Carlos told me about the machine, referring to how loudly it screeches if it loses power. It had happened one night while he was sleeping. He must have talked and turned too much, and the machine unplugged from the outlet. The neighbors upstairs heard it, Carlos said. Another time, he told me, the Máquina howled and would not stop. His brothers had to rush him to the hospital. Without the machine, his own heart would not keep him alive for long. He didn't know what the problem had been, but later I saw that his medical documents referred to a left ventricular assist device complication. I'll stop there, but Carlos did get a heart transplant and got a bit more of life. Thank you for listening.
Oh, that was amazing, and I was completely with you. I forgot we had to stop because we were on the webinar. Yeah, I hope that really inspired everyone to get a copy of the book and find out what happens next and what happens to all the many characters involved. Thank you so much, Daisy. That was amazing. So, Elizabeth, a very different kind of book, but over to you for what I'm sure will also be a very hard-hitting moment.
Yes, a different kind of book. And the title of this chapter, which comes from the thematic part 3 on the decolonization agenda, deconstructing Eurocentric hegemony ideology and pseudo-historical memory, is one that I chose this. It was a struggle to choose a section to read, but I just felt that this was so directly pertinent to the challenges of neglected tropical diseases within the African spotlight. And the chapter title is, this is chapter 11, African Challenges and Opportunities for Decolonized Research-Led Innovation and Communication for Societal Transformation. And the chapter author is Dr. Akanimo Odom. Okay, so what does Akanimo say? Another critical dimension to the challenges of delivering decolonized science communication in the African context, as in much of the global South, is the colonization of research, dressed up in the guise of collaborative international partnerships. There are a range of issues that make these sorts of partnerships untenable and unsustainable, and in some respects, blatantly unethical, particularly when the dominant partner in the global North shapes the research agenda, framework, and even its core focus to suit its own purposes without due consideration of local African circumstances, contexts, and priorities. In some cases, these international partnerships are based on providing an innovative solution to a local challenge in health-related issues such as infectious diseases. Yet, the resultant action is often a research publication or an innovation asset that assumes that the dominant northern partner or institution alone knows the problems and is solely capable of providing the solutions. This is done without due respect and recognition of the critically important role and contribution of the local African partners and institutions. This is science and research colonialism. In some other cases, local African partners are simply used as data collectors for major internationally funded research projects without due opportunities for co-authorship of research outputs, marginalizing the local partners and colonizing their research. For sustainable international collaborative partnerships to be equitable, it is imperative to view these partnerships through a decolonization lens, which recognizes that there are differences between partners in the global north and the global south. These differences should complement each other, making research more impactful, transformational, and publicly engaged. The differences in roles, culture, benefits, power dynamics, capabilities, and motivations should be discussed and deliberated upfront at the conceptualization stages of these international partnerships, and compromises reached before programs are initiated. Partners, institutions in the global south should be able to challenge the status quo and request equity in the delivery of research projects and their decolonized communication in these international collaborative partnerships. International funding programs should take note of these unequal power dynamics and should mandate equitable partnerships for international research project funding applications. The more that individuals and institutions from the global south lead and take ownership of these research projects, the greater the opportunities to enhance science communication and research devoid of colonized premises and ideologies. So again, for me, that chapter really encapsulates why and how we are where we are to be talking about neglected tropical diseases. Because who sets the priorities? Who drives the agenda? I always say, if Chagas diseases, if Chagas was affecting people solely in the global north instead of Latin America, I can assure you, Daisy, that not only would we have had a treatment by now, it would have been eradicated. We know that.
Yeah,
We know
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
In fact, a big boost for attention on Chagas disease came really from the blood transfusion side of things when, as you say, different pockets of people started becoming at risk. Well, that's really
It's interesting when you see the development suddenly in the last 5 years with climate change vectors driving global warming in southern Europe. Mosquitoes, malaria research has now been suddenly ramped up. Guess what? Because it is projected to become a disease burden in parts of southern Europe. And yet people in the global south have been dying of malaria for well over 100 years. And we've known all along what was the cause. So it really speaks to why we have the N, the neglected, and the tropical. Yeah, you would never have neglected temperate diseases. Yeah, so it is. Yeah, neglected tropical, not neglected temperate diseases. So it's
Very
very,
good
very
point.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, because it was not easy to ask you to choose one small part of these two amazing books, but I think the ones you shared were brilliant, so relevant, so much food for thought for us. And perhaps your book, Elizabeth, particularly speaks to science communication across many disciplines. And, there is just a small silver lining in the field of neglected tropical diseases. It being neglected as a branch of science, there has been a lot of partnerships in play. And I would like to think that this discipline, compared to perhaps other areas of science, has seen a bit more of an equitable approach to projects, but still lots of lessons to learn, and really a great time to pose for this introspection, because that's what's important at every stage, is to stop and think, readdress what's being done, how it's being done. I think we just lost Elizabeth's connection, but I have no doubt she will reconnect very promptly. If you're still connected, sometimes just refreshing the page seems to solve a lot of the projects. Sorry.
Yeah.
But that's okay, because I was about to move on to our next question. We've heard so much about the books. We've heard the books. And so as an author, Daisy, my question really was, you put a lot, as Toni Morrison said, if you can't find a book that you want to read, you should write it. And so what were some of the main goals you were trying to achieve by doing this? And also, have you reached those goals? Do you feel that the book is taking on this role that you expected it to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did, because and it really it speaks to so well. I'm so excited to read Elizabeth's volume, because I was very when I started doing a little bit of writing about Chagas disease, everyone said, oh, it's a disease of poverty. It's a disease of poverty, which implies that that no one has done anything, that it's like, oh, it happens to be a disease of poverty. So hence it's neglected. Like there's no one involved, and there's no one in the room. It's this empty room where poverty happens and then neglect happens. And it's very, I very much wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand why, as a global community, we make a decision to neglect certain diseases. And I really came to appreciate, as I write in the book, is that I feel like, and I was very conscientious that I'm talking about, perspective from the United States. I don't work in outside of these borders. So I'm very conscientious that that's the context that I was writing in. And a lot of times, we very much in the US think about public health as one thing and global health as basically someone else's problem, and so just that in and of itself is a huge barrier, which I think that the COVID pandemic exposed the degree to which in the United States we see ourselves, so exceptionally isolated from the rest of the world, and that we're not. I don't know that it's fundamentally changed how people think in the US, but I think it's cracked the door open a little bit. But I also really came to appreciate that, just exactly as Elizabeth was saying, a lot of people in the United States would only, if they knew about Chagas, which is, was very rare, they would know about it because the insects are finding more of the United States habitable thanks to the climate crisis. And so more of the United States is warmer. We're actually, most likely parts of Latin America are going to get too hot for these insects. And so a lot of times it would really only register in the news. And this is still true in the United States here. It still only registers in the local news when summertime comes around. And it's like, oh, watch out for these insects, because they're here with you. And it's like, but actually the disease burden is here in the United States already. And And so I really came to appreciate how much we don't have a policy of eradication, because these diseases don't touch those of us who are well off, those of us who are predominantly in well off white communities, and I think you saw this in the United States, we saw this with the Zika virus as well. So while I was working on this book, I worked on this book for like about 7 years. During that time, we had suddenly everyone discovered the Zika virus, and you got to see in the United States, people in the South, women who were pregnant, who had financial resources, disproportionately white women, they would leave. They would go stay with family in the North. Like literally, they would go to Chicago, they would go to New York, they would go to upstate, to basically get away from mosquitoes, and that wasn't true for those who did not have resources. Disproportionately Black, Latina women and I'm thinking specifically of Miami, where my family lives, didn't have the choices of working remotely, of leaving their job temporarily, of having family up north that could take them in. So you really got to see the racial and the economic disparities in a really intense way with that disease as well. So yeah, at the end of it, I feel like, okay, I understand more. It's more complicated than just disease of poverty, and what's driving the neglect is, so both historical and contemporary, and so incredibly layered and complicated. And I'm sorry, Elizabeth hasn't come back yet.
I just sent her a quick little note, and she is connecting from South Africa, so it's possible that there was a cut perhaps in the electricity or the internet, but hopefully she will be back any minute.
I'm connecting from Chicago, and it happens here too, so I totally get it.
London's the worst. Yeah, no, for sure, but no, that is absolutely a really good point. Don't just don't assume that things just happen in a vacuum, and trying to fill that vacuum. And scientists, we do that. We can go into a lot of detail about the mechanisms of feeding of the triatomine, and then just kind of stop to sometimes take a step back and think, oh, well, wait, why are the insects in people's homes, and why is this not being diagnosed? And yeah, so thank you. And just in terms of, you've got the book, your message is heard loud and clear. And so I was wondering whether, as an author, you've also felt that perhaps, have you been complementing this in your personal life or your professional life with other activities, whether they be podcasts or perhaps conference participations? Have you complemented your message with other projects, and is that part of your journey too?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a number of podcasts. Actually, there's a podcast. Oh my goodness. I'm going to bring it up on here. It's actually a podcast that I really love, with these two women, an epidemiologist and like a doctor. I think it's got a fun name, and everyone knows it. People have been listening to it for forever. Oh, This Podcast Will Kill You.
Oh, yes.
Yes, everyone knows it. I love it. I was new to it a couple of years ago, and I got a chance to talk with them. They did an episode on Chagas disease. So Fantastic. It was really fantastic to talk with them. And then, I just had a chance to talk at the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Yep. I got the acronym right. And that was amazing, because I got a chance to meet an incredible biology professor in New Orleans, who has started going out into the community to test people for Chagas disease. They have, a Latinx migrant community there, and she was inspired by the book. My hope was that people would read the book and that people would read the book and take whatever action they could, because I really think it's important, that we all do the work that we're doing, and we can move a piece in our corner of the world. And so it was amazing to see her read the book with her students, with her graduate students. One of her graduate students is now trying to, actually, this ties in really well with what Elizabeth was saying. He's looking to, do his PhD studies and focus on Chagas disease, but was also talking to me about how difficult it is, in the United States, to find a researcher who has a lab who would take on a postgraduate student. And he's aware that, he could go to other countries to do that, but he's very, he's being very conscientious about the fact that he doesn't want to take a spot that someone in that particular country, he could go to Brazil, he could go to Argentina, but he wants to make sure that people in those countries are getting those opportunities to do that work. And it should be available here in the United States for people to do this more in-depth research work. So yeah, it's pieces are moving of it. And then I'm getting a chance to talk with all of you. And yeah, it has had different pieces, different podcast video parts to it as well.
Wonderful. Well, I've just posted the link to the podcast, which I'm sure will be a very
fun. Thank you.
As is every episode, and we salute.
I love that podcast.
So that's wonderful. And Elizabeth also who's not managed to reconnect at the moment, but I hope for the last few minutes of this session, we will have the pleasure to see her again. But and I will put that link up as well, Elizabeth, being an extremely busy, proliferous ambassador for a lot of the messages that she says, has had a lot of conference participations, podcasts as well, and there's a whole website that collates all of these, so I'll put the link any minute. But what's really shown from both of your experiences and both of your books are very different but have a lot of commonalities, lots of commonalities, is that you have been an ambassador for your cause, I'll say, and then the book brings that all together. And my final question would be, so is this a bit of an endpoint for your journey, or do you find that the book has made you an even bigger champion of some of the messages that you wanted to share? Will we refer to you as the Chagas lady in future?
No, because I hope there will be many Chagas ladies or champions.
Yes, there
are. There will be many. I am. This book had me think a lot. I mean, all of my work has been around the Latinx community in the United States. So this was definitely I definitely never expected to write about medicine and science. So, but it definitely has been another piece, and for me, in terms of writing around race and Latinidad and diaspora. And it did open up a lot of questions for me. In the United States, we connect healthcare very intensely with citizenship status. And so it's brought up, so my next book is about citizenship because it raised a lot of questions for me about the kind of expectations and the weight and just the narrative that we have in the United States around citizenship. And it's not limited just to us, but I always like to be conscientious that this is the position that I'm writing for and that I know best. So yeah, it has led to that, and we'll see what comes after that.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a really wonderful moment spent in your company. I will attempt, I hope it's been working in the past, to share again the book covers with our audience. There we go. I hope that's coming up on your screens.
Yeah, it is. For me,
The Kissing Bug, a true story of a family, an insect, and a nation's neglect of a deadly disease by Daisy Hernández. And also Race and Sociocultural Inclusion in Science Communication, Innovation, Decolonisation, and importantly, Elizabeth and Transformation.
Yes,
I was just reading the title of your book. No problem at all. We were worried. Are you okay? That's the main thing.
What did I miss?
Well, we were just discussing about how you are a champion of your cause, 30 years in the making, wondering really whether the book is now, you feel that's kind of drawing all this to a concrete endpoint, or whether it's more of a springboard for you. And how do you feel? Are you, after your 30 years, are you even more of an advocate?
Yes, I feel that it's about doing both. It's a springboard, but it's also pulling things together to get to a certain stage. And here I was really motivated by the exhortation of Maya Angelou that we do the best we can until we know better. And then when we know better, we should do better. So for me, this was really the Maya Angelou thing of what do we know better that we can do better? And that's what this book summarizes. So that then takes us to the next stage of Maya Angelou's advocacy to say, now we know better, let's do better. So it is about both things, definitely.
That's wonderful. And we have no doubt that you'll continue to be this powerhouse of energy and, really
drawing the energy. I'll borrow some from Daisy.
Yeah, and I'll certainly learn a lot.
Did you have any questions from the audience that I missed?
No, we didn't. We didn't go to the audience for questions, and I'd like to really salute our audience who's tuning in. I can see Tina Lyons is here from Canada, Janice Lasdins as well, and we had Steffi from London. I'm sure a few very nice comments here. But really, I've been sat here between two tremendous giants. I've learned so much from you in terms of issues, but also this wonderful way of approaching them, making them accessible to a wide audience, and just as you were saying, taking that and then expanding it again to the next your next horizon. We hope to have you back on our ISNTD Connects or in our ISNTD events very, very soon. We really enjoyed certainly spending an hour with you, and we would very much encourage everyone to purchase the books, read them once, twice. There's so much contained in there that it's really a fabulous journey. And so if you have any final words before we bring this session to an end, we'd love to hear that. Daisy, if you had any concluding words for our audience, for anyone who could be a potential readership.
Yeah, I actually really love what Elizabeth shared about Maya Angelou's words. It's like, we do know better, so we can do better. Yeah, and I think it's like constantly raising the bar for ourselves individually and then collectively as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, what would you like? What would be your final words or your final ask from this audience that's captivated by your words?
All I can say really is to repeat the exhortation from the reviewer of the book manuscript, who basically said, and absolutely awe-inspiring, and said, this book draws a line in the sand of science communication. It draws a line in the sand of what we knew before and what we now know after this book. It is a book that desperately, desperately needed to be written, but more importantly, it is a book that needs to be read. Over to you, folks.
Yeah, a great review. That one stuck in my head as well, actually. Yeah.
A line in the sand. Yes. There's no going back. Ignorance is gone. Innocence is gone. Inertia is gone. We need to make that breakthrough.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you for closing on that note. So from all of us who've been listening to you today, another very, very big thank you. And let's keep in touch, definitely.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you to all. Yeah. Bye. Happy reading.
Yeah, thank you to our audience, and we'll be connecting soon again. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye, Daisy.
Bye,
Bye, Marianne. Bye.